I remember the exact moment when I broke the one promise I swore to keep. His lips were still warm against mine when I felt another man's hands sliding across my body. My wedding ring pressed hard into my skin as if it was trying to remind me of the vow I was shattering. I had told my husband that I would never hurt him, that I would love him with a loyalty that no storm could shake. Yet there I was, with another man's breath against my neck, betraying everything sacred. It was raw. It was heated. It was the kind of moment that feels alive and poisonous at the same time. Before I go deeper into the story, let me pause for a second to appreciate you, my audience. Thank you to all my wonderful subscribers who keep returning to this channel for these stories. You are the heartbeat that keeps me going. To all my new viewers, I want to say a huge thank you for being here. If you have not yet subscribed, I cannot wait for you to hit that subscribe button because it truly serves as the fuel and energy that powers this channel. And do not forget, engage with me in the comments right now. Share your thoughts as this story unfolds because your voices mean everything here. Now let me take you back. My name is Emily and I am a 34-year-old woman living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio. I grew up in a family that valued loyalty and faithfulness. I always believed that I would be the kind of wife who would never even think of betraying her husband. My husband's name is Daniel. He is 36, strong, gentle, dependable, and the kind of man who would rather break himself in half than ever break my heart. For 10 years, Daniel has been my anchor, the man who kissed me goodnight and whispered prayers over me when I was sick, the man who looked at me like I was the only woman in the room even when we were surrounded by hundreds. And then there was Marcus. Marcus was not a stranger who slipped into my life without warning. He was my colleague. We had worked together for nearly 2 years at the same marketing firm. He was charming, ambitious, and had a way of looking at me that made me feel 20 again. He was not as steady as Daniel, not as deeply rooted, but there was something dangerous about him. Something magnetic. I always brushed it off, laughed at his compliments, and went home to my husband like the good wife I wanted to be. But temptation is a slow poison. It does not kill at once. It seeps into your bloodstream until you no longer recognize the danger. It started with coffee breaks that stretched too long. Then came lunches outside the office where his hand would brush against mine as if by accident. He would text me late at night with jokes, stories, or little compliments about my smile in the morning meetings. I should have cut it off. I should have blocked him. But I did not. Instead, I found myself waiting for his messages, dressing in ways that I knew would catch his attention, and lying to myself that it was harmless. The night it happened is burned into my memory like fire. Daniel was away on a work trip. He had kissed me before leaving, telling me to take care of myself and that he loved me. I told him the same, with every intention of meaning it. But when Marcus asked me to meet him at a quiet bar downtown, I said yes. I told myself it was just a drink, just conversation, nothing more. But the moment I walked in and saw him leaning against the bar in his crisp shirt, his eyes fixed on me like I was the only woman alive, I felt my resolve weaken. We talked, we laughed, we drank. The air between us grew heavier, charged with something I could no longer ignore. When he touched my hand across the table, I did not pull away. When he whispered that he wanted me, I did not tell him no. By the time we left the bar, I knew I was already too far gone. We went back to his apartment, and as soon as the door closed, his hands were on me, his mouth pressed against mine, and my heart was pounding with a mix of guilt and desire. I kept thinking about Daniel, about his trust, about the way he looked at me that morning before he left. But instead of stopping, I sank deeper. Every touch, every kiss, every reckless moment was a betrayal, and I let it happen. Afterward, I lay there in Marcus's bed with tears streaming down my face. He reached for me, but I pulled away, clutching my clothes like they were some kind of shield. I had done the worst thing possible. I had destroyed the very foundation of my marriage. When I returned home the next day, Daniel's voice over the phone was so warm, so full of love, that I almost collapsed under the weight of my guilt. He told me how much he missed me. He said he could not wait to hold me when he got back. And I, with a trembling voice, told him that I missed him too. but my eyes were already haunted. My body carried the scent of betrayal. My heart was a battlefield between love and guilt. I knew Daniel would sense it sooner or later. Husbands like him always do. And that was only the beginning. The morning after Daniel returned home, I stood at the kitchen counter pouring coffee when he wrapped his arms around me from behind. His embrace was so warm, so familiar, that I almost broke into tears right there. I forced a smile, leaned back against him, and whispered good morning, pretending as if nothing inside me had changed. But everything had. I could feel the weight of what I had done pressing against my chest like a stone. Secrets have a way of taking shape in a marriage. They creep into the spaces between two people. They fill the air during silences. They echo in laughter that feels forced. Daniel did not know what I had done, but he sensed something. I could see it in the way he studied me when I looked away, the way his brow furrowed when I avoided his touch too quickly, the way he lingered at the doorway before leaving for work as if he wanted to ask a question he could not put into words. I tried to push my guilt aside, but it clung to me like a shadow. Every time Daniel kissed me, I thought of Marcus. Every time Daniel told me he loved me, I heard Marcus's voice whispering in my ear. It was like living two lives, one anchored in love and stability, and another drenched in lies and passion. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, terrified that Daniel would roll over and see the truth written across my face. The more I tried to bury the secret, the more it bled into my actions. I grew distracted at home. I forgot little things, paying a bill, returning a call, picking up groceries Daniel asked for. When he asked me what was wrong, I blamed stress, headaches, or deadlines at work. He believed me at first, but husbands who love as deeply as Daniel do not stay blind forever. Marcus, on the other hand, became bolder. He texted me constantly, sometimes late at night when Daniel was asleep beside me. My heart would race every time my phone lit up, and I would rush to silence it, terrified Daniel would wake up. Marcus wanted more. He wanted me to see him again, to sneak away like I had that first night. I told myself it was impossible, that I could not repeat the same mistake. But the truth was, my resolve was weaker than I admitted. One Friday evening, Daniel suggested we go out to dinner. He said it had been too long since we had a date night. I agreed, though guilt churned in my stomach. We sat across from each other in a cozy Italian restaurant we had loved since our early years of marriage. The candles flickered, the wine poured, and for a moment, I felt like maybe I could repair what I had broken. Maybe if I loved him harder, better, stronger, I could erase the betrayal. But when Daniel reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and said, "You seem far away lately," my heart froze. He searched my eyes, waiting for an answer. I wanted to confess everything right there, but fear strangled me. Instead, I lied. I told him I was overwhelmed with work, that I had been carrying too much stress. He nodded slowly, but I could tell he did not believe me fully. His thumb traced slow circles on my hand, and he gave me a soft smile, the kind that said he was willing to wait for me to open up. That smile cut me deeper than any anger could have. The truth, however, has a way of finding cracks to crawl through. One evening, a week later, I was leaving the office when a coworker named Jessica stopped me in the parking lot. She was younger, sharp, and had always seemed curious about Marcus. With a sly smile, she leaned against her car and said, "So, are you and Marcus a thing now?" My blood ran cold. I stammered something about professionalism, about how she must be mistaken, but her eyes glittered with suspicion. She smirked and said, "Relax. I do not judge. But people talk, you know." Then she slid into her car and drove away, leaving me trembling in the parking lot. Panic clawed at me. If Jessica suspected, if whispers spread, how long before Daniel found out? That night, I barely touched my dinner. Daniel asked if I was sick. I shook my head, claiming exhaustion. When he went to bed, I sat on the bathroom floor with my knees pulled to my chest, fighting back sobs. I wanted to end things with Marcus. I wanted to erase him from my life before everything exploded. The next day, I told him we could not see each other again, that it was too risky, too destructive. He stared at me with those intense eyes and said, "Emily, you cannot pretend this did not happen. You want me just as much as I want you." His voice was low, insistent, and for a moment, I hated him for being right. But I walked away. At least I tried to. The real unraveling came one evening when Daniel returned from work earlier than usual. I was in the kitchen, my phone buzzing on the counter. I had stepped away for a moment when he walked in. I froze when I saw him pick it up, glance at the screen, and frown. The message was from Marcus. It was short, simple, dangerous. It read, "I cannot stop thinking about last time." Daniel looked at me, his eyes searching, his lips pressed into a thin line. He did not say a word. He placed the phone back on the counter and walked past me, heading straight upstairs. My heart felt like it had shattered into 1,000 sharp pieces. That night, the silence between us was unbearable. Daniel lay on his side of the bed, facing away from me. I could hear his breathing, steady but heavy, like a man holding back a storm. I wanted to reach for him, to beg him to forgive me, to confess everything before the silence became permanent. But fear chained me to my side of the bed. I knew, in that moment, that the truth was no longer hidden. The secret had begun to bleed into the open. And when it finally came out, it would destroy us both. The silence between Daniel and me stretched on for days. He no longer kissed me before leaving for work. He no longer wrapped his arms around me at night. His voice was clipped, his laughter gone. The warmth in our home had been replaced by a tension so sharp it felt like walking through glass. I knew the message from Marcus had told him everything he needed to know, even if he did not yet have all the details. One evening, he came home later than usual. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. He set his briefcase down on the counter and said only one word. "Seat." I obeyed, my hands trembling as I lowered myself into the dining chair. He stood across from me, staring at me with eyes that looked nothing like the man who had once adored me. His voice shook when he finally spoke. "Who is Marcus to you?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. My throat tightened, my chest constricted. For a long moment, all I could do was cry. Daniel slammed his hand against the table, the sound so loud it made me flinch. "Do not make me ask again." The dam broke. The truth spilled out in sobs and shaking words. I told him everything. How it began, how I let it happen, how I betrayed him in the worst possible way. I begged him to understand that I still loved him, that my weakness did not erase the years of devotion we had shared. But my words were daggers, and every confession cut him deeper. Daniel turned away from me, gripping the back of a chair as if he needed it to hold himself up. His shoulders shook, and then I heard it, the sound of a man's heart breaking. He was crying, openly, painfully, in a way I had never witnessed before. Seeing him like that was worse than any punishment. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "You promised me, Emily. You promised me you would never hurt me." I collapsed to the floor at his feet, clutching his legs, begging him to forgive me. But forgiveness was not something that could be given in a moment. It was something that had to be wrestled with, fought for, clawed out of the ashes. That night, Daniel slept in the guest room. I lay alone in our bed, staring at the empty space beside me, realizing I had created a chasm that love alone might not be able to bridge. The weeks that followed were a blur of anguish. Daniel withdrew into himself. He avoided me whenever possible, burying himself in work, in silence, in anything that kept him away from me. Our friends noticed. My mother called, asking why Daniel seemed so distant. I lied, telling her he was stressed. Inside, I hated myself for not only betraying my husband but also forcing him into a cage of humiliation he did not deserve. Marcus tried to contact me again, but this time I blocked him. I knew I had to cut him out completely if I had any chance of saving my marriage. But the damage was already done. Every time Daniel looked at me, I could see the image of Marcus reflected in his eyes. Every time he opened his mouth, I braced myself for the word divorce. And then one Sunday morning, Daniel finally spoke the words I had been dreading. We need to decide what happens next. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. He looked exhausted, older, as though my betrayal had stolen years from him. Do you want this marriage, Emily? Or do you want to run back to him? Tears burned my cheeks as I shook my head violently. I want you, Daniel. I want us. I made the worst mistake of my life, but I cannot lose you. Please. I will do whatever it takes. He studied me for a long, heavy silence. Then he said, if you want me to even consider staying, you have to fight for this marriage harder than you fought to betray it. His words were harsh, but they were also a lifeline. He had not given up completely. The road to redemption was brutal. We went to marriage counseling. At first, Daniel sat stiff, arms crossed, refusing to look at me. But as weeks passed, he began to speak. He told me about the rage that kept him awake at night, the humiliation that suffocated him, the deep wound of knowing the woman he trusted most had broken him. Listening to him was like standing under a storm with no shelter, but I stayed. I listened. I accepted every word because I knew I deserved it. Slowly, he began to see my sincerity. I cut all ties with Marcus, deleted his number, and changed jobs to prove my commitment. I checked in with Daniel constantly, not because he asked me to, but because I wanted him to see transparency where once there had been lies. There were days when he could not look at me, when he slept on the couch, when I thought it was all over. But there were also small victories. The morning he reached for my hand again, the night he let me rest my head on his chest, the day he whispered, I am trying, and it felt like hope. It took months, but eventually, Daniel chose forgiveness. Not because he forgot what I did, but because he loved me enough to fight for what we still had. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to me and said, You broke me, Emily. But you are also the only one who can help me heal. His voice trembled, but his eyes were soft, filled with a fragile kind of love. That night, for the first time since the affair, he held me the way he used to. I cried into his chest, promising him I would never hurt him again. This time, I meant it with every fiber of my soul. I had betrayed him in the worst way possible, but he chose forgiveness. And in that choice, we discovered something deeper than passion, deeper than desire. We discovered the painful, redemptive truth about love. It is not about never falling, but about choosing to rise together, even when the fall nearly destroys you.